I did every pitch, closed every meeting, and built the relationships that kept our biggest clients loyal. But when the promotion came, they gave it to Kyle, the guy who'd never signed a single contract in his life. I sat there in that conference room, watching them hand my future to someone who couldn't tell a P&L from a grocery list. And all I could think was, all right, game on. My name is Madeline Carter, and for 10 years, I built my life around Summit Ventures. At 36, I wasn't just an account director, I was the account director. The one they called when Vanguard Tech threatened to walk. The one who turned hostile negotiations into multi-million-dollar renewals. The one who kept 40% of our revenue flowing through relationships I'd cultivated like rare orchids in this concrete jungle of Chicago high-rises. I'd started as a junior analyst, fresh from Northwestern with an MBA and enough ambition to power the Willis Tower. While others played politics, I played the long game. I learned every client's birthday, their kids' names, their golf handicaps. I memorized their pain points better than they did. When Vanguard Tech's CFO mentioned offhand that their procurement process was bleeding efficiency, I spent 3 weeks building a solution that saved them $2 million annually. That's how you build trust. That's how you become indispensable. Or so I thought. The partners called me their golden closer. Behind closed doors, they joked that I could sell ice to Eskimos, though I preferred to think I sold solutions to problems people didn't know they had. Every quarterly review, my numbers spoke louder than any PowerPoint could. My client retention rate hadn't dipped below 95% in 5 years. My average deal size had tripled. When competitors tried to poach Vanguard Tech, I didn't just defend, I expanded our contract by 30%. Robert Hutchinson, our VP of Client Strategy, had been grooming me as his successor for 2 years. We'd had the conversations, the ones that mattered. When I retire next spring, Madeline, this office is yours, he'd said, gesturing around his corner suite with its panoramic view of the Chicago River. You've earned it 10 times over. I believed him. Why wouldn't I? I'd done everything right. Every late night, every weekend call, every sacrifice had been a deposit in my future. While my college friends were starting families, I was starting empires within Summit Ventures' client portfolio. My apartment in Lincoln Park was essentially a storage unit for suits and a charging station between meetings. Then there was Kyle Benson. Kyle joined Summit Ventures 3 years ago, sliding into a senior manager role that seemed crafted just for him. He had the right look, tall, square-jawed, the kind of presence that filled a doorway. He had the right connections. His father and our CEO, James Morrison, had been fraternity brothers at Yale. He had everything except the right skills. In 3 years, Kyle hadn't closed a single deal on his own. Not one. He'd inherited a few accounts from departing managers. Sure, but watching him try to nurture client relationships was like watching a toddler perform surgery. He spoke in buzzwords and sports metaphors, clearly cribbed from whatever leadership podcast he'd absorbed during his morning workout. Clients tolerated him the way you tolerate a friend's annoying spouse, with forced smiles and early exits. But Kyle had mastered one skill I'd overlooked: proximity to power. While I was flying to client sites, Kyle was having lunch with Morrison, while I was perfecting pitch decks. Kyle was perfecting his golf swing at the same country club where the board members spent their Saturdays. He didn't need to understand our clients' businesses when he understood the internal politics of Summit Ventures with surgical precision. I should have seen it coming. The signs were there, the closed-door meetings I wasn't invited to, the strategic initiatives Kyle suddenly spearheaded despite his complete lack of strategy. The way Morrison's assistant started copying Kyle on emails meant for the senior leadership team. But I was too busy doing my actual job to play these games. I had Vanguard Tech's contract renewal coming up, a $12 million cornerstone of our revenue. I had relationships to maintain, problems to solve, value to create. That's the thing about being good at your job. Sometimes it blinds you to the fact that being good isn't always enough. Not when someone else is better at the only game that really matters in corporate America, the game of who you know, not what you know. The conference room was packed that Tuesday morning. Quarterly all-hands meetings were usually predictable affairs, revenue updates, new client wins, the occasional retirement announcement. I'd positioned myself near the window, laptop open, ready to present Vanguard Tech's renewal timeline when called. Morrison stood at the head of the table, his silver hair catching the morning light. "Before we dive into Q3 results," he began, his voice carrying that false casualness that made my stomach tighten, "I have an exciting announcement about our leadership team." I straightened in my chair. This was it. Robert had submitted his retirement notice last month. As you know, Robert Hutchinson will be transitioning out of his role as VP of Client Strategy. His contributions over 15 years have been invaluable. Morrison paused, his eyes scanning the room but somehow never landing on me. "After careful consideration, we've selected his successor. Someone who embodies the future of Summit Ventures. Someone with fresh perspectives and strong leadership potential." My hands stilled on my keyboard. The way he phrased it, not experience, not results, but potential. "Please join me in congratulating Kyle Benson as our new Vice President of Client Strategy." The words hit me like ice water in the face. Around me, polite applause erupted. I watched my hands join in, operating on autopilot while my mind reeled. Kyle stood up, that practiced smile spreading across his face as he shook Morrison's hand. He was wearing a new suit, I noticed. Of course he'd known. Of course he'd prepared. "I'm honored," Kyle said, his voice pitched perfectly between humility and confidence. "I look forward to building on Robert's legacy and taking our client relationships to the next level." Our client relationships, the ones I'd built, the ones he couldn't maintain if his life depended on it. I felt eyes on me, colleagues who knew, who understood what had just happened. Sandra from Analytics caught my gaze, her expression a mixture of shock and sympathy. Even Robert, sitting quietly in the corner for his last meeting, looked uncomfortable. The rest of the meeting blurred past. I presented Vanguard Tech's renewal timeline when called, my voice steady, professional. I answered questions about implementation schedules and risk mitigation. I performed the role of the dedicated account director who was absolutely fine with being passed over for a promotion she'd earned 10 times over. Kyle approached me immediately after the meeting ended. "Madeline," he said, his hand extended like we were closing a deal. "I'm looking forward to working more closely with you. Your expertise with Vanguard Tech will be crucial during this transition." I shook his hand, meeting his eyes. "Congratulations, Kyle. I'd love to set up some time this week to discuss the account structure. Maybe you could walk me through your client management process." He was already talking like my boss, casual assumption of authority coding every word. Of course, my assistant can coordinate our calendars. That afternoon, the new reality set in fast. Kyle scheduled himself into my client meetings without asking. He requested access to my meticulously maintained relationship databases. He started copying himself on emails to Vanguard Tech, inserting himself into conversations with the gravitas of someone who'd actually earned the right to be there. Within a week, he was introducing himself as the strategic oversight on all my accounts. Within 2 weeks, he was actively excluding me from high-level discussions, relegating me to what he called tactical execution, while he handled strategic vision. The worst part? His incompetence was immediately apparent to everyone except the people who mattered. In a planning session with Vanguard Tech, he confused their acquisition timeline with their product launch schedule, a mistake that would have been laughable if it hadn't required 40 minutes of my diplomatic intervention to smooth over. He called their CEO by the wrong name twice in a single meeting. He promised deliverables our team couldn't possibly meet, then looked to me to somehow make it happen. But I didn't explode. I didn't storm into Morrison's office demanding justice. I sat in my office late that second Friday, staring at the Chicago skyline, and felt something cold and precise click into place inside me. They'd made their choice. Now I would make mine. The invitation arrived on a Thursday evening, 3 weeks after Kyle's promotion. Not to my Summit Ventures email, to my personal Gmail, the one I rarely used for professional matters. "Madeline, heard about the recent changes at Summit. Would love to catch up over coffee." Evan Marshall. Evan Marshall, CEO of Sterling & Co., our biggest competitor and the thorn in Morrison's side for the past decade. We'd crossed paths at industry events, exchanged the kind of professional pleasantries that really meant, I respect you, but you're the enemy. Sterling had tried to poach Vanguard Tech twice in the past 5 years. Both times, I'd been the one to keep them in our corner. I stared at the email for a long moment. Then I typed back, Tuesday, 4 p.m., the Drake Hotel Lounge. Neutral territory. Public enough to maintain plausible deniability. Private enough for real conversation. Evan was already waiting when I arrived, positioned in a corner booth with clear sightlines to both entrances. He stood as I approached, old-school manners that Morrison had long abandoned in favor of power plays. Madeline, you look well. He meant it. Evan had that rare quality in our industry, genuine authenticity. You look opportunistic, I replied, sliding into the booth. He laughed, a rich sound that drew glances from nearby tables. Fair, though I prefer strategically aware. Coffee? We ordered cortado for him, Americano for me, and sat in comfortable silence until the server disappeared. I'll be direct, Evan said, leaning back. Sterling's entering a growth phase. We've secured funding for aggressive expansion, particularly in the tech sector, but we keep hitting the same wall. Vanguard Tech, I said. Among others, your clients are loyal. Madeline. Remarkably so. We've tried everything, better rates, enhanced services, broader integration capabilities. They won't budge. Because they're not buying services, I explained, something Kyle would never understand. They're buying trust, relationships, the confidence that when something goes wrong at 2 a.m., someone who actually understands their business will answer the phone. Evan nodded slowly. And that someone has been you. Has been. I agreed, letting the past tense hang between us. I heard Kyle Benson's running point on Vanguard Tech now. He continued, casual as discussing the weather. How's that transition going? I took a sip of coffee, considering my words. Kyle's bringing fresh perspectives to the role. Evan's smile was sharp. That bad? I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Madeline, I've watched you work for years. You don't build what you've built and then happily hand it over to someone who can't tell a P&L from a balance sheet. The accuracy of his assessment, so close to my own thoughts, should have bothered me. Instead, I felt a strange relief. Someone else saw it, someone who mattered. What are you proposing, Evan? Initially, nothing dramatic. Sterling's launching a new consulting framework, strategic advisory services for enterprise-level digital transformation. We need someone to architect it. Someone who understands not just the technical requirements, but the human elements, the politics, the unspoken concerns that kill deals before they start. I have a non-compete clause, I said. As a consultant, independent contractor, not an employee. He slid a folder across the table. Our lawyers have reviewed it. Clean boundaries. You wouldn't be soliciting Summit Ventures clients. You'd be building something new. Something yours. I opened the folder. The number at the bottom of the compensation summary was significant. But it wasn't the money that made my pulse quicken. It was the scope, full autonomy, direct reporting to Evan, the chance to build something from scratch, the right way. I need time to think, I said. Of course. But Madeline? Evan leaned forward. We both know Kyle's going to implode. It's not a matter of if, but when. The question is, do you want to be there to clean up his mess? Or do you want to be building something better? I left the Drake with the folder in my bag and a decision crystallizing in my mind. That night, I pulled up Vanguard Tech's contract details. Every provision, every renewal clause, every carefully negotiated term I'd crafted over the years. If I was going to do this, I was going to do it right. And that meant understanding exactly what Summit Ventures had to lose. The systematic dismantling of my career began the Monday after my meeting with Evan. Kyle, apparently sensing something in the air, moved from passive incompetence to active sabotage. Madeline, quick sync? He appeared in my doorway at 7:45 a.m., knowing I'd be the only other person in the office. I've been reviewing the Vanguard Tech account structure. I think we need to redistribute some responsibilities. I minimized the Sterling proposal I'd been reviewing. Oh, I'll be taking lead on all strategic communications going forward. You'll focus on... He paused, pretending to think. Implementation details, day-to-day management, the tactical stuff. 10 years of relationship building reduced to administrative work. I see. And the quarterly business reviews? I'll handle those, but don't worry, you can still prepare all the materials. His smile was all teeth. Team effort, right? By Wednesday, he'd removed me from the Vanguard Tech Steering Committee emails. By Friday, he'd rescheduled my standing monthly lunch with their CEO, claiming he needed to establish his own rhythm with key stakeholders. But the masterstroke came the following Tuesday. Team meeting in 5, Sandra whispered as she passed my office. Kyle's called an all-hands on the Pinnacle project. Pinnacle was a smaller account, but strategic, a fintech startup with massive growth potential. I'd nurtured them from seed funding through Series B, and they were weeks away from signing an expanded contract. Kyle stood at the conference room whiteboard, my project timeline reproduced in his chicken scratch handwriting. As you can see, he was saying as I entered, there are some serious gaps in our approach to Pinnacle's expansion needs. What gaps? I asked, taking a seat. He turned, feigning surprise at my presence. Ah, Madeline. Good. Maybe you can explain why Pinnacle's integration timeline doesn't align with their stated Q2 objectives. I pulled up the actual project plan on my laptop. Because their Q2 objectives changed 3 weeks ago, we adjusted the timeline accordingly. It's all documented in the change management log. Which I wasn't copied on, Kyle said, his tone suggesting grave negligence on my part. You were copied. March 15th, 2:47 p.m. You replied, looks good with a thumbs-up emoji. Scattered chuckles around the table. Kyle's neck reddened. Regardless, he pressed on. Pinnacle's CEO called me yesterday. They're concerned about execution delays. That was a lie. I'd had lunch with Pinnacle's CEO yesterday. We'd discussed their kids' college applications. That's interesting, I said calmly. Since I had lunch with Sarah yesterday and she expressed nothing but satisfaction with our progress. Well, she called me after your lunch. Privately. Kyle's emphasis on privately was meant to sting. She's worried you're not adapting to the new structure. That maybe you're too attached to the old way of doing things. The room went silent. Everyone knew what was happening. This wasn't about Pinnacle. This was about putting me in my place. I see, I said. And what does Sarah suggest? I'll be taking over the Pinnacle relationship. You can transition the files to me by end of day. He turned back to the whiteboard, dismissing me. Now, let's discuss how we're going to repair this situation. I sat through the rest of the meeting, taking notes I'd never use, nodding at solutions to problems that didn't exist. When it ended, I walked calmly back to my office, closed the door, and called Evan Marshall. I'm in, I said when he answered. But I have conditions. I'm listening. I finish out my obligations professionally. No burned bridges, no dramatic exits. I'll need 6 weeks to transition properly. Done. What else? When I build your enterprise transformation practice, I do it my way. No interference, no second guessing. That's why I want you. And Evan? I paused, choosing my words carefully. When the time comes, and it will come, when Sterling has the opportunity to compete for certain accounts, I want to be the one leading those pursuits. His silence stretched for a moment, then, I wouldn't have it any other way. I hung up and began documenting every Pinnacle interaction from the past 18 months. If Kyle wanted the account, he'd get it, along with every complexity, every stakeholder preference, every delicate political balance I'd maintained. But I'd be damned if I'd make it easy for him. 6 weeks later, I submitted my resignation via a single-line email at 6 p.m. on a Friday. Effective 2 weeks from Monday, I'll be pursuing opportunities outside Summit Ventures. M. Carter. Morrison called within minutes. Madeline, let's discuss this. My office. Monday morning? Of course, I replied, already knowing how that conversation would go. Monday's meeting was textbook corporate theater. Morrison sat behind his massive desk, Kyle flanking him like an incompetent lieutenant, while HR's director lurked in the corner with a folder I assumed contained either a counteroffer or legal threats. Madeline, Morrison began, his disappointment as manufactured as his concern. This is unexpected. After 10 years, I'd hoped you'd come to me if you were unhappy. I did, I reminded him. 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 6 months ago. Would you like me to pull up the emails? Kyle shifted uncomfortably. Morrison's jaw tightened. Where are you going? Kyle asked, trying for casual and landing on desperate. I'm taking some time to reassess my priorities, I said. Not technically a lie. I'd been reassessing them for weeks. Your non-compete, HR director began, prevents me from directly soliciting Summit Ventures clients for 12 months. I finished. I'm well aware. My lawyer has reviewed it thoroughly. The mention of a lawyer changed the room's dynamics immediately. There's no need for lawyers, Morrison said quickly. We value what you've built here, Madeline. What if we reconsidered your role, created a new position that better utilizes your strengths? Too little, too late. But I smiled politely. I appreciate that, James. But my decision is final. Kyle leaned forward. What about your accounts? The transitions? I've prepared comprehensive transition documents for every client, historical context, stakeholder maps, communication preferences, renewal timelines, everything someone competent would need. The competent hung in the air like a challenge. My last 2 weeks were a masterclass in professional grace. I conducted thorough handovers, answered every question, responded to every email. When clients called, concerned about my departure, I assured them they were in capable hands with Kyle and the team. Capable might be generous, Vanguard Tech's CEO Sarah Chen said during our final lunch. But I appreciate you trying. Kyle has Morrison's full confidence, I replied diplomatically. Morrison's confidence doesn't run my IT infrastructure, she countered. But we'll see how it goes. Your personal email's still the same? It is. Good to know. She raised her wine glass. To new adventures, Madeline. Something tells me yours will be worth watching. My last day was a Friday. I packed 10 years into 3 boxes, said my goodbyes, and handed Kyle my key card at 5 p.m. sharp. Any last advice? He asked, trying to sound magnanimous in victory. Trust your team, I said. Listen more than you talk. And remember, every client has a breaking point. Try not to find it. Monday morning, while Kyle was discovering that my comprehensive documentation somehow omitted all the unwritten rules and personal dynamics that actually made things work, I was setting up my new office at Sterling & Co., not an employee, better. A strategic consultant with a mandate to build something revolutionary. Evan stopped by as I was arranging my desk. How does it feel? Like freedom, I admitted. Good. Because I just got an interesting call. Apparently, 3 of Summit Ventures' mid-tier accounts have quietly put out RFPs for new consulting partners. Completely unrelated to your departure, I'm sure. I'm sure, I agreed. My non-compete is very clear about solicitation. Of course, but if they come to us, then we'd be remiss not to submit proposals. I pulled up my laptop. I've actually been working on a new framework for enterprise digital transformation. Something that addresses the implementation gaps traditional consultancies tend to overlook. Evan grinned. The gaps Kyle's about to discover. Among others, but this isn't about Kyle or Summit Ventures. This is about building something better. Something that actually serves client needs instead of just billing hours. Agreed. But Madeline? He paused at my door. when Vanguard Tech's contract comes up for renewal in 8 months. I'll be ready, I said simply, because I would be. Every slight, every humiliation, every moment of being undervalued, they were all fuel now. And I was just getting started. 8 months. That's all it took for Kyle to systematically destroy what I'd spent a decade building. The calls started in month 3. Former colleagues, whispering updates like spies in enemy territory. Pinnacle fired us. Kyle promised Cloud Runner capabilities we don't have. He told MicroHealth their contract terms were suggestions. But I stayed focused on Sterling. My enterprise transformation framework wasn't just competing with Summit Ventures, it was redefining the game entirely. Where they offered rigid consultancy packages, we provided adaptive solutions. Where they pushed one-size-fits-all strategies, we built custom architectures. By month 6, we'd won 7 new clients. Not Summit Ventures clients, I kept my word on that. But their competitors' clients, their potential clients, the ones Summit Ventures had been too arrogant to pursue properly. Then, February arrived, and with it, an email to my personal account from Sarah Martinez, Vanguard Tech's CEO. Madeline, our contract renewal is coming up. Kyle has sent us a proposal. I'd like to explore all options. Are you available for coffee? I met her at our old spot, a quiet cafe in the Loop where we'd solved a dozen crises over the years. I'll be direct, Sarah said after pleasantries. Kyle's a disaster. He's confused our infrastructure roadmap with our procurement timeline twice. He pitched us solutions for problems we solved 3 years ago. Last week, he called our CTO by my husband's name. During a board presentation, I winced. Sarah, you know I can't. I'm not asking you to violate your non-compete, she interrupted. I'm telling you, as a friend, that Vanguard Tech is exploring options. All options. If Sterling & Co. happen to submit a proposal for our upcoming contract. That would be Sterling's decision, I said carefully. Of course. But if they did submit a proposal, it would be helpful if the person leading it actually understood our business. Our real business, not whatever Kyle thinks we do. She slid a folder across the table. Our RFP. It goes public Monday. But since we're old friends, I thought you might appreciate an early look. You know, for market research purposes. I took the folder. I appreciate your friendship. Madeline. Sarah stood to leave. That $12 million figure Kyle quoted us. We're prepared to go higher for the right partner. Significantly higher. That afternoon, I walked into Evan's office with the RFP and a proposal outline that addressed every pain point Kyle had created, every opportunity he'd missed, every relationship he'd damaged. You sure about this? Evan asked. Morrison will go nuclear. Let him. I've followed every legal restriction. This is a competitive bid for a public RFP. The fact that I happen to know Vanguard Tech's business better than their current consultancy does, that's Kyle's problem, not mine. We spent 3 weeks crafting the perfect proposal. Not just services and pricing, but a complete transformation of how Vanguard Tech could leverage strategic consulting. Where Summit Ventures treated them as a revenue source, we positioned them as a transformation partner. Where Kyle saw transactions, we presented a 5-year innovation roadmap. The presentation was scheduled for a Thursday. I wore my best suit, the same one I'd worn to every major Vanguard Tech meeting for 5 years. Sarah's board recognized me immediately. Madeline, the chairman said warmly, we've missed your insights. I've missed providing them, I replied. For 90 minutes, I laid out a vision that went beyond consulting, integration partnerships, co-innovation labs, dedicated teams that actually understood their business. And yes, a price tag that reflected the value, $15 million for the first year. With performance incentives that could push it to 18, Kyle's counteroffer came the next day, desperate and sloppy. He'd undercut our price by 20% but offered nothing new. Just the same rigid frameworks, the same empty promises delivered by someone who still couldn't remember their CTO's name. Tuesday morning, Sarah called my direct line at Sterling. Congratulations, Madeline. The board voted unanimously. Welcome back to the Vanguard Tech family. Thank you, Sarah. We won't let you down. I know you won't. Oh, and Madeline. Kyle called this morning. He seemed upset, mentioned something about betrayal and legal action. I told him that choosing competent partners wasn't personal. It was just business. I hung up and looked out at the Chicago skyline. Somewhere in those towers, Kyle was learning what I'd learned months ago. In this game, relationships weren't just currency, they were everything. And he'd just lost the biggest one of all. The news hit the business press within hours. Sterling & Co. lands mega deal with Vanguard Tech. Summit Ventures loses cornerstone client. The LinkedIn posts started flowing, carefully worded congratulations from former colleagues, thinly veiled schadenfreude from competitors. My phone buzzed with Kyle's number. I let it ring. Morrison tried next, then HR, then legal. I forwarded everything to my attorney and focused on what mattered, delivering for Vanguard Tech and proving that Sterling's investment in me was justified. By Thursday, the real impact became clear. Without Vanguard Tech's 40% revenue contribution, Summit Ventures was hemorrhaging. Emergency board meetings were called. Hiring freezes implemented. The Whisper network reported panic at the highest levels. Sandra texted me that Friday. Emergency all hands at 3. Rumor is they're cutting Kyle loose. I was in a strategy session with Vanguard Tech's innovation team when the news became official. My phone lit up with messages from former colleagues. Kyle Benson, VP of Client Strategy for exactly 11 months, had decided to pursue other opportunities. That evening, I stood on the 50th floor of Sterling's offices watching the sun set over the city. The same view I'd admired from Summit Ventures, just from a different angle. Better angle, actually. Evan joined me, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. Celebration? Reflection, I corrected, accepting the glass. Any regrets? I thought about it. 10 years at Summit Ventures. Relationships built and lost. The comfortable path I could have stayed on, accepting diminished responsibility and swallowed pride. None, I said finally. Good. Because I just got off the phone with Cloudrunner's CEO. They're impressed with what we did for Vanguard Tech, want to discuss possibilities. Cloudrunners with Summit Ventures, I noted, were past tense. Apparently, their contract has a 30-day termination clause. Funny how Kyle never noticed that detail. I smiled despite myself. When do they want to meet? Monday. You available? I'll make time. My phone buzzed again, a text from an unknown number. You planned this from the beginning. Kyle. I considered responding, then deleted the message. He was wrong, anyway. I hadn't planned it from the beginning. I'd planned it from the moment they showed me exactly how little I was valued. Every meeting, every transition document, every careful move had been a chess piece positioned for this moment. Another text, this one from Sarah. Drinks next week. My treat. Want to discuss phase 2 of our partnership? P.S. Morrison called me personally to try to win us back. I told him we'd found a partner who actually understands partnership. I raised my champagne to the window, to the city below, to the Summit Ventures office building visible in the distance. To new beginnings, Evan said, clinking his glass against mine. To earned endings, I countered, because that's what this was. Not revenge, exactly, but justice. The kind you create for yourself when the system fails you. The kind that comes from knowing your worth and refusing to accept less. Somewhere in that gleaming tower. Morrison was probably calculating how to explain a $12 million loss to his board. Kyle was updating his LinkedIn profile, scrubbing his brief VP tenure of any mention of Vanguard Tech, and the machine of Summit Ventures was grinding on, diminished but not dead. Yet, I turned away from the window. There was work to do. Cloudrunner to win, a framework to expand, an empire to build on foundations of competence instead of connections. They taught me that being good wasn't enough, that politics trumped performance, that who you knew mattered more than what you delivered. They were right about all of that. They just forgot one crucial detail: the people who actually do the work, who build the relationships, who understand the business. We learn those lessons too, and we learn them better. My email chimed. 3 more companies reaching out, all current Summit Ventures clients, all exploring their options. I opened my laptop and got to work. The game wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. And this time, I wasn't just playing to win, I was playing to change the rules entirely. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop a comment below and let's connect. If you enjoyed this revenge tale from the corporate world, please subscribe to the channel and share your thoughts. Have you ever experienced something similar in your workplace? I'd love to hear your story in the comments.